actually think, let me stop the share. I may have pulled up the wrong PowerPoint because they're very similar. So let me double check that. I want to make sure I give you the right slides, guys. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like it's been a very busy season. Do y'all want to put in the chat kind of like what you're hoping that we chat about today? And then um, have y'all been busy too? I feel like it's been exceptionally busy.
I feel like the spring is always super busy. Like there's just so many events. Maybe because the weather is nice and people are outside, there's just always something going on.
Yes, I think so too. It's definitely been very busy for me in my life. Okay, so these are the right slides. Just wanted to double check. Have y'all ever had that moment where you're teaching and you're like, I don't know if this is correct. This looks different. Okay, so we will get back to it. Okay, all right. We used to teach heart health and cholesterol together, and then now we do it separately. And I'm going to still talk to you about some heart health because they go hand in hand. But my name is Abby Horton. I'm an assistant professor here at the College of Nursing. I'm a registered nurse. I've been a licensed nurse since, um, goodness, 16 years now. And I'm a certified health and life coach, a Wellbeing ambassador for the nursing school and previously for Honors College. And I have been one of the wellness class educators for you guys for the last 7 or so years. And so this is actually my second to last class to teach for Wellbema. It's definitely a very bittersweet moment, but as life gets busier and busier and more things get added to the plate, sometimes things just end up being like, the next right decision. So I have absolutely enjoyed my time as a Wellbeing educator and cannot say enough good things about the experience. So you can reach me at abby.horton at ua.edu if you want to reach out, ask questions, or if you have any follow up. I'm always happy to answer those or give you resources. So much of what I love about teaching in the classroom, but also teaching Wellbema content is really getting to connect with the people who are on the classes. And so you guys have really been a great community for me over the last 7 years. And it's definitely starting to feel real that it's coming to an end. But today we get to finish out with one of my very favorite presentations. It is for educational purposes only, and it doesn't constitute medical advice. If you have specific questions, it's always good to reach out to your healthcare provider because they know your history and the specifics about you. But we can answer general questions. So we're going to talk about ways to reduce our cardiovascular risk factors. We're going to talk about the difference between cholesterol and some of the other things that you may talk about in terms of like lipid profiles and other blood work numbers. We'll talk about the relationship between cholesterol and hypertension, and we'll talk about risk factors for both and how those go hand in hand. And then we'll talk about healthy habits to reduce both your high cholesterol and your high blood pressure. So, all of this really relates to cardiovascular disease, which is considered the number one killer in the global community. So, heart disease and stroke are under the umbrella of cardiovascular disease because it's looking at your heart health, your vascular health, which is like your veins and your vessels, and it's looking at the health of your blood essentially and your blood flow. So you can see here that about 18 million folks every year die from CVD, which is cardiovascular disease. And about 33% of all global deaths can be related to cardiovascular disease. So there are other things here that you can look at. You can see the difference between cardiovascular disease and cancer or other respiratory diseases, and even HIV. And I think it's important to understand that because we talk a lot about cancer. We talk about the big C word. And cancer is definitely something that we should pay attention to. But again, cancer and cardiovascular risk go hand in hand because there's an inflammation component usually that's driving both of those disease processes. So, risk factors for cardiovascular disease include having high blood pressure. And so that would be consistent, sustained high blood pressure. when you have 3 or more readings that say that your blood pressure is high, so you go and you get checked and maybe Wellbama, you see that your blood pressure is high, so we tell you to go over to the faculty staff clinic, or we tell you to go to your primary care doctor or your nurse practitioner, and they get a high reading, then you're going to have to come back. And if you have a third high reading, then you're likely to get diagnosed with hypertension. So I like to tell people, all of us have high blood pressure at some point. I had to drive across campus today and park in an unfamiliar parking lot and walk a longer distance than I normally do. And I was on a time crunch and I didn't want to be late. I was really early, but I didn't want to be late. I had to find the room I was going to. And so I was like really walking fast, And I know if you were to stop me and take my blood pressure, it would have been higher than normal. And so that is not meaning that I have hypertension. It's just a normal body response. But if you have sustained high blood pressure, then that becomes the diagnosis, which is hypertension. And people get that confused. Having high cholesterol, being overweight or obese, air pollution, physical inactivity. So maybe you don't do a lot of movement during your day, an unhealthy diet, having diabetes, using tobacco or nicotine, having kidney disease, or overuse of alcohol can all play a factor. So we're going to talk about some of those things. So cardiovascular health really refers to the health of the heart and the blood vessels. So there are several risk factors that lead to the development of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, tobacco use, and diabetes. And some of those risk factors are some of us are more prone to addiction than others. Some of us have more of a tolerance for caffeine than others. Some of us have more of a tolerance for nicotine and tobacco use than others. There's genes that they've identified that make us more or less likely to be sensitive to those substances, alcohol, etc. And then lifestyle factors like if we're not walking a lot, if we're not moving our bodies a lot, if we're eating high fat, high carb meals without a lot of protein, if we are sitting a lot during the day. They say that sitting is the new smoking. So that is, causing more issues for folks than maybe even smoking at this point, because smoking cessation is pretty high in most people now. So those are all kinds of things that go hand in hand with cardiovascular health, and that's why we pay attention to cholesterol so much. So February is Go Red for Women, and it's a campaign because the signs and symptoms that you have with heart issues for women differ than for men. So men have that stereotypical chest tightening, gripping feeling on their heart, left arm pain or numbness, and just not feeling well. Whereas women have different signs and symptoms. They might have more upper GI or like stomach gas pain. They can feel like it's their gallbladder and that pain radiates or goes to the back of their shoulder blade. They can have very different sensations. Also, the pain can come and go more than for men. It's not sustained like it is for men. And they may not have that true chest tightness and pain or gripping feeling, or people will say it feels like an elephant sitting on my chest. Women typically don't have those early signs and symptoms that are characteristic. And so the American Heart Association started this Go Red for Women campaign to let women know more about these symptoms. And so I didn't realize until I started teaching more of this content that Go Red actually was an acronym. It's get your numbers, so know what your lab values are, and you can do that, some of that with Wellbama. Own your lifestyle. So, be really aware and accountable to the lifestyle choices that we make. I have to do that too. I'll tell you my example from today. Realize your risk factors. So for me, my risk factors are pretty high for cardiovascular disease. I have cardiovascular risk factors on both sides of my family. My dad's father actually died from complications with a heart cath because he had a lot of blockages and he was having unstable angina or chest pain. And so he actually died while I was in the hospital being born. So he got to see me before he passed away, but I was in the hospital at the same time that he was, and that had a really profound effect on our family. So, that was the first person on my dad's side of the family that had had heart issues. Well, on my mom's side of the family, every sibling, including my mom, has, and she has seven, there's seven of them, all seven have had at least one MI or early onset cardiovascular disease. And so they live very different lives and lifestyles. And so while, epigenetics, meaning, what we do with our lifestyle turns on our genes still do take a big role. Some folks would like to believe that genetics doesn't play a huge role, that it's mostly lifestyle. That's what you're going to hear. But what I see in practice is that it does play a big role, and that shouldn't be scary because there's so much that you can do with lifestyle to protect against what our genetics have given us. And so I'm 40, but I have already gone and had chest x-rays. I've already gone and had heart and blood markers that have looked at that. I've gone ahead and done genetic testing to see what genetic risk factors I have because I do have some ongoing health issues. And so I've already taken steps so that heart attacks in my 50s are not inevitable. My mom had a heart attack at 55, and she's had two others since then in her 70s. And so for me not to have that as my risk factor, I have to really own my lifestyle choices and realize my risk. And that doesn't mean we're perfect. And then we educate others. So, like we're doing here, but go and tell a coworker, a family member, a colleague, and then don't be silent. So, if you feel like there's something going on with your health, or if you feel like that there's something that you need help with, definitely reach out for help. We don't have to be kind of a victim to our genetics. We can really take a lot of care and do some good, healthy choices to make life better. And I'll tell you about those. So cholesterol and hypertension go hand in hand. A lot of times what will happen is you'll go into the care provider and you'll get your numbers and it'll say, oh, you have high blood pressure. Let's look at that. And then they'll go and look at the blood work and they'll say, and this happened to me in my early 30s, they'll say, oh, you happen to have high cholesterol too. And you know what's so funny is that it's a little bit of a misnomer because there are lots of reasons why you can have high cholesterol. There are lots of reasons why you can have high blood pressure, but oftentimes there is a positive relationship with the two. And here's why. When your cholesterol is high, that means that it's likely that you see these little yellow things on this picture. I have others that I'm going to show you. That's cholesterol deposits. When your cholesterol is too high, it means that your liver and your body, your extra cells can't take that and do something with it. So it gets deposited or left in little piles in your blood vessels. And eventually those can become places of rupture, so that when you have something like a blood clot or when you have something like a heart attack, that's that vessel that has been compromised because you have too much cholesterol sitting out in the vessel not being used, which is not the purpose of cholesterol. And so the reason that your blood pressure can become high is because as it's blocking that vessel, the blood gets blocked and it's like a hose pipe. That hose, if you are ready to go and start getting your, garden or your yard ready and you're hooking up your hose pipe, if you didn't drain that water over winter and over the fall, you might have some corrosion in that pipe. And then when you go to actually turn it on, you might not have the same amount of pressure that you remembered having last summer. And it's because you've got that corrosion in there. Well, the corrosion in our vessels, in our arteries, in our veins, that is going to be the cholesterol that didn't get used up. Okay. And so then we know that um, hose pipe in our example, if it just was sitting out and we didn't take care of it over winter, it could have some cracks in it, right? Because it got water and it froze. So when we turn that on full pressure where it should be, then we're more likely to have breaks and tears in our hose pipe, and we're more likely to have to be able to get those kinks out to get that corrosion moving, turn up the pressure to be able to flush it out. Well, our body does the same thing, but when we're turning up the pressure in our body, it's turning up our high blood pressure. And so that's when we start looking at maybe having hypertension if it's sustained. So there's lots of facts and things on here that you can look at, but looking at the things you can do to help reduce your risk are things like stopping smoking. If you can't stop smoking, smoke less. If you can't stop the sugar, eat and drink less sugar. Make heart healthy choices. Move your body. Lose weight. I know that's easier said than done. Take medications if you're prescribed medications. All those same things that you do for cholesterol, you can see at the bottom you do for high blood pressure. So that's really nice that what you do to help one, you can do to help the other. And they say, you can see on that graphic, they say that high blood pressure is the silent killer. I actually think that it's that cholesterol is the silent killer because there really are no side effects and symptoms from high cholesterol, but there are from high blood pressure. So in my early 30s, I was a young mother. I was working full time. I was going to graduate school. And I was in a health clinic in Bibb County with my students, and we were taking blood pressures of those elementary school students. And I was having a sustained headache, and I felt so fatigued. No amount of caffeine, no amount of water, no amount of anything I was doing was helping. And so I pulled over one of my students that I knew wouldn't mind taking my blood pressure, and I knew she was really good at it. And I said, I need you to come over here and check my blood pressure. And she was panicked and she thought that she had done something wrong. And so I had to reassure her and I said, nothing is wrong. I've gotten you because I think my blood pressure might be high, but I'm not sure. So come take it. And she got really wide eyed. I'll never forget. And she said, I was Mrs. Horton at the time. She's like, Mrs. Horton, she said, your blood pressure is blah, 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 over blah, blah, blah. And it was like in the stroke level. I mean, I should have immediately left and gone to the hospital. But if you know me in real life, I'm not going to do that. So I was like, okay, well, let me just call my doctor and tell him that I have high blood pressure. And they said, you need to go to the ER immediately. And I said, I'm in Bibb County with my students. Absolutely not. We're doing a health fair. And of course, they laughed and they said, okay, well, you leave there and you come straight to the office. We'll stay open. I left there with a prescription for hydrochlorothiazide, which is their favorite medication to give when you have high blood pressure. And they actually gave me a one-time dose to get it down because it was still stroke level range when I got to the office. And so I took hydrochlorothiazide for 3 years before I was able to wean off. It took 3 years to go from having stroke level blood pressures to having optimal blood pressures, which doesn't really happen. And that's why I always share that story because people will tell you once you get on blood pressure medication, you're on it for life. And that is simply not true. It's just really, really challenging to get off of it. But if you're determined, you can. And so for me, I knew that was something that because of my heart history that I shared with you, I didn't want to go down that road. And so also taking heart and blood pressure medication can have other side effects. And I have a heart condition. And so I'm like, this is what we're going to do. And so I hope that serves as inspiration. You can absolutely reduce or reverse with medical supervision if you have diabetes, high blood pressure, all of those things. My husband and I are both examples of that, but it's not easy and we're not special. It just takes a lot of grit and determination. So I hope to equip you with that today, that inspiration and maybe some of that knowledge. So cholesterol, we look at this image and I don't like it, but it's very effective in teaching. And so I use it with a disclaimer of LDL is not bad. It's not the devil, which is depicted here. And HDL is very angelic like, but it's not the enemy of LDL. And then you've got red blood cells. So cholesterol is mainly comprised, so it's made up of fat and lipoproteins. And a lipoprotein is made up of cholesterol, protein, and fat, which is what we measure as triglycerides in the blood. So fat in the blood is called triglycerides. We like to use big fancy words in healthcare. So LDL, we learned in school, was the lousy cholesterol, and HDL was the healthy or the happy cholesterol. And then you've got, of course, your red blood cells that are kind of moving through this transport system together. Okay, so why LDL versus HDL? It's two types of cholesterol. Your LDL is what gets sent out of the liver, is what gets consumed in our food. Our body makes most of our cholesterol, and so it's important to make healthy choices with our food But if you have high cholesterol, very, very high cholesterol, it's likely that your body is making it. And if your body is making that much cholesterol, it's probably because you have a lot of inflammation on board. And so, yes, we don't need to be eating McDonald's every day in the drive-through. Did I do that in my early 30s when I was driving a minivan full of kids and working full time and doing clinicals with students 4 days a week and going to graduate school? Yes, I certainly did. And I still miss my McDonald's biscuit. But I was eating it way too much, right? Not as a treat, but as like a survival mechanism. And so my cholesterol was also very high. And while the provider acted like that was surprising, it wasn't surprising. Um, it made perfect sense. It was a part of the equation. So the LDL goes out, and what happens is it goes and looks for places it can be used. Well, cholesterol looks for places in your vessels that need to be patched. It looks for places in your body that need repair. And the cholesterol goes there and it helps fix those areas. It also is a part of hormone synthesis, so helping your hormones actually be made. It also is a part of vitamin D production, and it helps with other normal body functions like this repair system. So when people say, oh, cholesterol is high, oh, blood pressure just happens to be high, but we don't connect that relationship for you guys as a patient, it really does a disservice, because if you know the relationship, you understand what's influencing it. Also, when you have an event like a blood clot that gets thrown, or a heart attack, or a stroke, those are the same processes. It's just a matter of, does it affect the brain stroke or does it affect the heart attack? Um, the thing is that they're like, oh, let's blame cholesterol, because cholesterol is always high in the folks that actually have the stroke or the heart attack. Well, that would be like, y'all know I love an analogy. That would be like blaming the police officer that's at the scene of a wreck. And they're like, you know what? It's those police officers' fault that there's always wrecks, because every time we see a wreck, there's a police car there. Well, we know intellectually, like, hopefully that's a good example for you guys, but we know that the police officer didn't cause the wreck. The police officer is there because a wreck happened and they're there to help. Same thing. The event that happened, yes, the cholesterol is high, but the cholesterol is high is because they're the police officer trying to get there to help. There was already a wreck there. There was already a problem in that vessel, in that organ, but the cholesterol came to help patch and repair and fix it. It's not the cholesterol's fault. It's just they happen to be there. And y'all, if I don't come up with anything else to teach in the rest of my career as a nurse educator, that is my very favorite example. And what I love teaching is because this affects so many people. And when I was in school and when I went back and did my health and life coach certification, people made this so difficult to understand. And I'm like, it can't be this hard, right? Like, let me figure out a better way to teach this, because this doesn't make sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to me, it probably doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And y'all, it's really that simple. Inflammation is really what's driving a lot of the problems that we have. And inflammation comes from those lifestyle factors that I mentioned, even things like the air pollution. And so this is the relationship of cholesterol. Well, now the reason that the HDL gets to be the happy angelic helper is because HDL goes in like Pac-Man. Now, my nursing students don't understand Pac-Man, but I hope you guys do. It goes in there like a game and gobbles up the unused LDL. Well, when you go and you have your health coach, appointment with your Wellbama, health screening, and they were like, oh, well, your LDL is high and your HDL is low. Again, not surprising, because those two have a relationship together. So the HDL is the Pac-Man and goes and gobbles up the LDL. And if you don't have enough HDL to gobble up the LDL, that's when you get too much cholesterol out in the bloodstream in those vessels, depositing and causing what we call plaques. Those little hills or piles of cholesterol are called plaques. And so we need more HDL to go gobble up the LDL. Unfortunately, the things that make the LDLs too high also drive not having enough HDL. And so it makes it kind of difficult sometimes to get the LDL down while you get the HDL up. And that ratio matters more than the numbers because we know that there's only so much that the HDL can go and then do. I hope that makes sense. Am I changing anybody's life in the chat? Y'all can let me know. I hope it's helping. So cholesterol is a soft, fatty, like waxy substance. Now, if y'all ever have earwax, there's two types of earwax. Earwax can be waxy and wet and like a really brown color. And most of the population has that kind of earwax. I have one kid that doesn't. You actually, I prefer that kind of earwax if I'm your mother because it's easy to clean your ears. But if you don't have that kind, you sometimes can have the dry, lighter colored, crusty, flaky earwax. Okay. So for all of you who are on the call that has or love someone that has the thick, dark, waxy, wet earwax, that is a lot like what cholesterol looks like, feels like, acts like. Y'all know that that's very sticky. And so your cholesterol, you can actually have cholesterol deposits. Gallstones sometimes are actually just fat deposits of cholesterol. And so they call them stones, but you go in and you have your gallbladder removed, like I did, thinking that they're like kidney stones, and they're not. They're like this cholesterol deposits because that's usually what sometimes they're made of, and they're very thick and it's very waxy, very sticky. So think about that getting into your bloodstream. If you're not drinking enough water, and it's been kind of a wild week, so I didn't have time to fix my Stanley. So I have a plastic water bottle, which I never drink out of. But if you're not drinking enough water, water in plastic is better than no water. So we're just doing the best we can today. But if you're not drinking enough water, your blood is very thick, and that we call that viscous. So your viscosity of your blood goes up, and now you have thick blood, and now you have cholesterol in there that is also pretty thick and it's sticky. So that is what causes the issue with the vessel. So cholesterol is normal, it's healthy, it's needed. We could not survive without cholesterol. Cholesterol is not bad. We just have to make sure that we understand the relationship. So your liver makes most of your cholesterol, but it's also found in foods, things like meat and dairy, and you can have processed, foods that have cholesterol in there or that raise the cholesterol. And your body has to have cholesterol to work. So we don't want our numbers to be real, real low, because even at ideal numbers, low numbers, you have to have enough cholesterol on board so that if you go out and have an accident today, your body has enough cholesterol to help support you and help repair you. So it's a delicate balance. Okay, so we talked about the types of cholesterol, and then grouped in with that is actually the triglycerides that we remember are the fats that are in the blood. So I talked about this function of HDL and LDL, and this is a graphic explaining that. So you've got the liver that makes the LDL. It goes out into the body through the bloodstream. It carries cholesterol to the cells to repair. So you can see it's coming in here to take care of this plaque, which we know is that pile or mound of cholesterol. And then the HDL comes in and it gobbles up like Pac-Man and takes it back to the liver to be reprocessed and sent back out. Okay. And what doesn't get taken and transported gets left to cause problems at some point in the future from your arteries or your vessels. So triglycerides are a type of fat, like we said, and sometimes you can actually see things like trans fats. Trans fats are not the same thing as triglycerides, so make sure you look at the label on your food. If your food has a label, that is a good indicator that it's pretty processed. All food is processed, but that it's a highly processed food. So when you start making healthy choices, try to find foods that don't have a nutrition label. When you go into the produce section, the apple doesn't have a nutrition label. So if it is a plant or a vegetable or a fruit or something like that, it's not going to have that. But if it was made in a plant, kind of the play on words, it's going to have a nutrition label. Shopping the perimeter, the outside of the grocery store, is going to help you get those healthier foods until you make it to the ice cream aisle, and then probably not. But ice cream is usually on the perimeter too. But if you're shopping the meat and the fruits and the vegetables and the produce, you're usually okay. And unfortunately, the bakery and the ice cream is also on the perimeter. So just kind of know that. But when you go and you look at like the butters, the fats, the oils, I always tell people, and this is a little bit controversial, so fact check me and make your best decision. I prefer natural things. So I'm going to choose butter over margarine or over almost butter or any of those substitutes. I'm going to usually choose a good sugar that's naturally made, like monk fruit, over like, or maybe even cane sugar over something like aspartame or stevia. Stevia gives you, a lot of people gives you headaches. So if you notice that you're using stevia, or you may be getting something that's diet from a store, I noticed that I would get headaches a lot of times when I would get a diet lemonade back during my dieting days. And it was from the stevia. A lot of folks will have an immediate headache. So it's a chemical reaction headache, and they're really difficult to get through. And you have to basically go to sleep. And so if you have headaches from stevia of any kind, you're probably always going to have those headaches and probably will be sensitive to other sugar alternatives. So I believe in real butter in moderation. I believe in real sugar, not the white, processed sugar in the blue bag, but real sugar like monk fruit, cane sugar in moderation. I believe in real oils like vegetable oil, like avocado oil, over things like vegetable oil or Crisco or things like that. So I'm always going to choose real in moderation over anything that was made in excess. So the calories that you eat, it's really important that you think about how those calories get used. If we consume more calories, especially from fats, that we're not actually using because we're sitting a lot, and I'm sitting a lot in the season of life, then what happens is they get stored. So not only are we storing the cholesterol in our blood vessels, we're also then storing the fat in our blood. And that is causing more of an issue with that sticky fatty substance because fat will also start to stick and cling. So when your body needs energy, it's going to try to use those triglycerides. But if we're consuming more of that than we're actually using, it's going to keep getting stored. And so then we're going to have kind of this imbalance of our energy. So triglyceride levels, we like to see those less than 150. Borderline high is 150 to 199, high is 200 to 499, and then very high is over 500. And so it's really important that if you do have a level over 150, that you talk to a healthcare provider because you may have metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome, I'm going to link to a slide later, talks about all of the different things that we've chatted about. If you have all of those signs and symptoms, then it's likely that you have metabolic syndrome where you're insulin resistant, it's difficult to lose weight, and all of these numbers are probably in the high or out of the optimal range. So trans fats are naturally occurring in artificial food preservatives in fried, baked, and processed foods, and it triggers the liver to make excess cholesterol, which is driving the inflammation in our bodies. So that's a red light. So that's something that we want to avoid. Saturated fats are going to be things like animal fats and full fat dairy that we all heard about in the 90s, or like stay away from fats. Saturated fats are bad. Well, you need saturated fats in moderation. So some full fat dairy, some animal fats, or some substitutes if you're, vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, pescatarian. If you have those kinds of restrictions on your meals and your diet, you're going to need to get that fat from other sources that meet your ethos and like your standard of your food. And then unsaturated fats are those healthy fats that are things like fish. So salmon is always a great example, avocados, almonds, walnuts, olive oil, and flaxseed. Research through the blue zones have found that people who eat nuts and seeds typically live 3 years longer than people who don't, controlling all other factors. So, it's just important that when you eat those nuts and seeds and things, a lot of things have taken those out, because there have been so many nut allergies. So you just have to be really mindful of that. Also, you have to be really mindful of your teeth because, let your knife do a lot of the work so that your teeth aren't having to crunch those as much. But you could live 3 years longer potentially. So cholesterol, like I've mentioned, helps with the vitamin D, helps with digestion, helps with hormones. And there is a little kind of formula that looks at your higher risk versus your lower risk of these things. And it just talks more about the good and the bad. So the lipid profile here looks at your total cholesterol, your LDL, your HDL, and your triglycerides. So I'm not going to read all of these numbers, but you want your total cholesterol typically to be under 200, your LDL to be typically under 100, your HDL to be over 60, and your triglycerides to be under 150. But what's important is that you actually look at the individual numbers, because when we go somewhere for our blood work, usually they tell us our total cholesterol, which is this 200 number, and they're like, oh, your cholesterol is 220. Okay. Well, here's the thing. We can do some quick math. If you've got LDLs, maybe they're 90, and you've got your HDL, and maybe it's 120. I've never seen them that high. I've seen it as high as 100. But if you've got your LDL and your HDL combined, if you've got a higher HDL, which isn't typical, but it happens sometimes, that can put your 200 number over that 200. So you technically could have okay LDL, not optimal, but okay, and your HDL could be pushing that number over. And so it's important to kind of understand the full picture by knowing those individual numbers. So that excess cholesterol in our bloodstream that accumulates, it becomes I don't know if I'm going to be able to say the words today, but basically hypercholesterolemia. Not enough caffeine today. You also then can get atherosclerosis, which is where the deposits are in the vessels. And so the deposits in the vessels then become that diagnosis. And then that can lead to heart disease, and then that can lead to heart attack and stroke. But there aren't any symptoms of high cholesterol. With high blood pressure, you're going to get kind of a gauzy feeling in your eye. You're going to have eye pain. You're going to have headaches. You're going to be fatigued. You're going to be tired. So like I said, it's really not the silent killer being high blood pressure. It really is the cholesterol, which is usually the driver of high blood pressure in most cases. Not all, but most. So heart attack, stroke, we also can have poor circulation that goes along with it. So for people who have diabetes, kind of thinking back to metabolic syndrome, it could be that poor circulation in their hands and their feet. That becomes really important to understand. Okay, do we have that issue? So this looks at the normal artery. There's no blockages. The initial stage of atherosclerosis, or those plaques building up, the significant atherosclerosis, and then you actually have the last stage. So a complete blockage is about 70%. A lot of times people will think a complete blockage, for me, before I started studying this and became a nurse, I would have thought that a complete would have meant 100%, right? Like we give our all. But it's 70% because at this point, a 70% blockage is already causing pain, is already causing clots, is already causing constriction of the blood flow. And so you're already seeing symptoms. And so at this stage, you're already doing interventions like heart caths and different things like that. So the inflammation then helps us understand that excess LDL begins to seep into the inner wall of the artery when the blood pressure, particularly when it's high. So you can see those blood cells trying to go over the cholesterol in the blood vessel. And this becomes an issue where it triggers an inflammatory response, because all of the people in the immune system come to help out, and they're like, oh, the blood cells are having a problem. They're signaling there's a problem here. So then they send all of their helpers here to try to, actually do something with this cholesterol. Can we get this cholesterol gone? It's like a foreign invader. And that triggers the inflammatory response because it's a part of the immune system response. And so that actually can speed up the accumulation. It actually has a negative effect. Instead of helping, it actually causes more harm. So think about when, the police kind of block the line and they're not really paying attention to the traffic because there's a lot going on with the wreck. You can actually have a lot of secondary wrecks because, the police came and kind of blocked things, not blaming them, obviously, but like, you can have traffic flow issues when the first responders get there. You have more backing up, and then you can have more wrecks because of that. Same thing happens in our blood vessels. So this produces more inflammation, and it's just a constant cycle that doesn't, really stop unless you do something to stop it. And that's where the lifestyle factors come in. So you can have the stroke, the fatigue and dizziness, shortness of breath, chest pain, lower back pain, which is pretty, uncommon for people to know about, but not uncommon for people to experience. People can have erectile dysfunction because that's just usually a blood flow issue. And then you can have the painful, numb, or cold hands and feet, which we call neuropathy. And usually we see that with people who have diabetes. Because the thing is if you're consuming all of this food and all of this stuff that has a lot of sugar, that has a lot of calories, a lot of cholesterol in it, you're probably also raising your blood sugar levels, which we call blood glucose. It just means how much sugar is in the blood. So now we've got fat that's sticky, we've got cholesterol that's sticky, we've got blood that's thicker because we're not drinking our water, and now we're putting in sugar in our bloodstream. That's making it thicker. I hope this is kind of painting the picture. So the pressure then that you have, we've got to turn that hose pipe on faster to get that line cleared. So then that high blood pressure goes up, and that's when it increases your heartbeat because your heart is the pump. So then your heart starts beating fast, and you don't get the rest period that you should when your heart is at what we call at rest, right? So the heart pumping, doing its job is that top number you see. It's usually the 120 number over that bottom number is going to be when your heart should be at rest. And that's why sometimes it's more concerning for people when that bottom number is higher, because that's when you actually should be resting between your beats where the heart chambers are starting to move the blood. And so it's when you're being really taxed when you should be resting. So that's when we're like, oh, the bottom number is actually what we're more concerned about. So this looks at the normal versus the pre-hypertension versus the hypertension. So it really relates to how the blockages start to form. And then you can see it kind of pictured again a little differently over here. But I think that this helps you kind of understand. So diastolic pressure is measured between beats when the heart relaxes. Systolic is measured between when the heart contracts. Okay, so these are the normals for blood pressure categories. Now people like to see that your blood pressure is less than 120 and less than 80. So if you see a 120 or 80, you're probably going to move into that higher risk category, even though years before that used to actually be the ideal. But it's because there's not a lot of margin. If your blood pressure spikes, you're going to be into those stroke level blood pressures. While you're out driving around, if you were to go and try to slam on your brakes to prevent hitting a car in front of you, if you're already at 120 over 80, you don't have as much margin before you're spiking into these higher numbers. Okay. So recommendations, things like getting your health checks yearly is really important. I go see my healthcare provider usually every April, and usually in March or April, I'll go and do my Wellbama screening. I think it's great to have those numbers walking into the appointment, because a lot of times at my doctor's office, I don't actually get my blood work numbers until after the appointment. So that helps the conversation. Also kind of treating things before they crop up. If you know you have, high blood pressure or diabetes or heart or stroke, any of that going on, talking to your provider about that and specific recommendations is really important. Hypertension symptoms, I mentioned many of those, but things like shortness of breath, nosebleeds, flushing, dizziness, chest pain, irregular heartbeat, pounding in your chest, neck, or ears, feeling like the blood is just rushing to your head. Visual changes, so blurry vision or feeling like there's cotton in your eyes. They could be itchy or dry. Blood in your urine, fatigue, or confusion are all symptoms. And then I mentioned this before, 3 or more readings are going to give you a diagnosis of hypertension and likely a prescription medication like hydrochlorothiazide. So health effects, we've mentioned a few of these, but these can lead to things like heart failure, heart attack, kidney disease, sexual dysfunction, it really systemically, like head to toe. If you're having these issues with high blood pressure, all of your body systems are going to be impacted in some way. So about 1 in 3 adults are actually pre-hypertensive, and 1 in 3, actually have the diagnosis of high blood pressure. So only about half of those folks actually know and have their blood pressure well controlled. So risk factors that you can't change are things like your genetics, your ethnicity, your age, your sex or gender. But things like your stress management, your smoking, your substance use, your weight, your diabetes, your salt intake, what you're eating, your caffeine consumption, which can cause a lot of inflammation, and then your lifestyle factors like how much you're sleeping, how much you're resting, how much you're moving throughout the day, how much you're exercising. All of those things are things that you can change, and they're things that we already know really to do. So treatment can look like medications, which I've listed those here. And then diabetes, the component that we really talked about a little bit earlier is that circulating blood sugar is further damaging those blood vessels, which is facilitating even more plaque buildup because it's making a spot for it to be sticky. And so the combination of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and diabetes increases your risk for all of the things that we mentioned, including things like diabetic retinopathy, cataracts, glaucoma, kidney disease, peripheral artery disease, which then leads to neuropathy, which is that numbness, coldness, and tingling in the hands and feet. So high blood sugar, high blood pressure, low HDL, which is the good, the high triglycerides, and then excess adipose tissue, which we call fat tissue around the waist, can actually cause what we call metabolic syndrome. So even at a healthy weight, people can still have metabolic syndrome. And it definitely increases your risk for certain cancers, again, because the driver for all of this is inflammation. So a healthy approach to your lifestyle, you control what you can control. And in life, honestly, I've had a couple of people reach out to me this week and say, there's a lot on your plate. Here's what's going on, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. And so from the book that Hal Elrod wrote, The Miracle Morning, he has a ritual of setting a timer for 5 minutes. Maybe we need to be sad or angry or just process our feelings. He'll put on whatever music he needs, and for 5 minutes, he lets himself feel his feelings. And then at the end of that, he turns all of that off and he says, can't change it, right? Kind of like Nick Saban's Next Playboys. Can't change it. So it is what it is, can't change it. But focus on what you can change, which is a good bit, right? It's only what we can do though, right? We can't change other people. So if you smoke, like I said, smoke less until you can quit. It takes an average of, I think, 11 or 12 attempts to quit smoking before you're ever successful. You just haven't quit enough times yet. Monitor your blood pressure, monitor your weight, monitor your numbers. Listen to me. I was morbidly obese for much of my adult life after having kids. Ended up having metabolic syndrome and a liver adrenal tumor, and I could not do anything to get the weight off. Do not focus on losing weight first. Change your habits and your lifestyle, and the weight will come off. But if you try to change things to get the weight off, it will stay on there and you will be so frustrated. I know that firsthand. I weighed over 250, 260 pounds. I have to estimate, I know I got to 250, 255, and then I stopped weighing myself. I was morbidly obese class 2 for my size, my height, and it took over 4 years for me to lose 115 pounds. And it wasn't the end all be all that I thought it was going to be. It didn't make me instantly healthier. So just know it's going to be something that you kind of have to work through. It takes some elbow grease, but it's worth it, right? Like put in the effort for yourself. But it's not a magic cure all. So just know that. Have good support. Have an RDN. Use the Nourish app for nutrition. Control your sugar. Watch your cholesterol. Get active, right? Yes, you want to cut down cholesterol, but that doesn't mean that you stop eating eggs. Eggs are generally healthy for most people. Try to get 150 minutes of activity in a week. and you should be breathless, but you should still be able to have a conversation. So I'm talking really fast to get all this in, so I feel a little breathless. But you're wanting to be a little bit more breathless than I am, and 150 minutes at a sustained moderate intensity, meaning you can't sing, but you can chat with your friend, but it's going to come out kind of huffy puffy. And then eat a heart healthy diet. So the Blue Zones is a great place to start, both for a lifestyle. They've got the Power of Nine, and then they've got a lot of cookbooks and books out there, a lot of free resources, um, a documentary on Nat Geo, lots of stuff out there. But basically, adopt a Mediterranean lifestyle, right? Don't get in a hurry, don't get stressed, don't get rushed, sleep, take naps, connect with family, friends, eat olive oil, healthy fats, fish, a mostly plant-based diet. Those are the kinds of things. If you can adopt that lifestyle, do a Google search. That's going to give you all of the resources you need, mostly for free. And then we've got the wellness basics. Sleep is foundational, but sleep is hard. I've struggled with my sleep for a year, and it finally corrected itself this week. I have not slept through the night without taking like magnesium or melatonin or sometimes an Advil PM, which I never take over the counter medications, in a year. And something very stressful happened last year. And then I've been walking out through that. And there was a resolution this week. And guess who slept for the first time with nothing over the counter on Monday and Tuesday? I did. And I would never have guessed the reason I wasn't sleeping was this one stress point in my life, but it was. And so I say that to say journaling, tracking those kinds of patterns can really help you identify those things. Striving for a healthy plate, so half your plate's veggies, half your body weight in ounces of water a day with electrolytes usually is a good idea. Moving your body every day, but more specifically every hour, and then doing brain breaks or meditations a few times a day. So 3 to 5 minutes, up to 15 minutes, 3 to 5 times a day. Boxed breathing is where you inhale for 4 and you might exhale for 4, hold, and then breathe in for 4. You can do that. You can work your way up to 8 seconds, but that's a great technique to reset your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, which is going to be that rest and digest kind of mechanism versus flight and fight. So we've got a talk on those, but this is a little checklist to how you can improve the 5 wellness basics. I came up with that years ago, and it's my favorite thing that I think I created other than my analogies earlier. The GLIDE technique, I cannot take credit for, but I love it. It's talking about looking at journaling, gratitude for the day, something you learned from the day, something you accomplished, and then something that just brought you delight or joy. That's a great way to end your day. Gratitude is a great practice, not only for your mental health, but it's been shown to help your mental and physical health together, and it can actually increase your happy hormones and decrease your inflammation. So here's some other practical tips. Was it a bad day or was it just a stressful 5 minutes? I know we're coming at our time, so I'm going to wrap up, but some things about smoking, exercise, BMI, which is not all the end all be all, but it's a good metric to know. And then the DASH diet is really common for hypertension treatment, but I like the Mediterranean diet. It's very much hand in hand with that. Looking at your nutrition labels, don't just look at the calories. And then here's how to understand a food label. Some things to try versus some things not to do.
Oh,
Yeah.
There's a few questions, and one
Yeah.
caught my eye because it's on supplements. Let me see if I
Yeah.
can. Let me see. Let me see.
I'll
I know
leave
I
it
just
till
saw
that
it.
one. Start where you
Oh,
are, use what you have, do what you can. Yeah, go ahead, Miranda.
do you recommend taking vitamins or supplements to improve heart health? If so, which ones?
Yeah, that's going to be very individual for people, and I would say to definitely work with a provider on that. You need to know your numbers rather than just supplementing. But I absolutely do. But I don't think that you should take the same vitamins or supplements all the time. It is a supplement, so you just need to supplement where you're missing that. So vitamin D is something I take, for example, during the fall and winter months, but I don't usually have to take it during the summer because I'm outside enough. So you definitely want to know your numbers and then use good brands like Pure Encapsulations, seeking help. And you're welcome to message me. I'm happy to give you resources. Any others, Miranda?
Yes. How does weight, stress, or sleep affect my cholesterol?
All three drive inflammation, and so all three will raise your cholesterol. Some people are resistant to that kind of stress and it doesn't, but for the most part it does for many people, especially women, because of our hormones. We're more susceptible to that.
Thank you. And then if you were to have thick blood, would this cause you to bruise easily?
It can, I mean, but it doesn't have to be. So bruising easily is something that you definitely want to talk to your healthcare provider about, because it could have like something to do with clotting factors, or it could be some vitamins or minerals that you're deficient in. There are a lot of genetic reasons why people bruise easily too. So it could, but not necessarily. But definitely something worth getting checked out.
Okay. Do you have time for two more?
Yeah, I can take as many.
Okay. Does regular blood donation affect these levels?
It can, but they should check your levels before you go and you give, and they should give you feedback on that. They can track that.
There was someone who asked about how much fish you should eat in per week, like salmon and tuna. I said
Yeah,
3. Is it 3 servings, 5-ounce servings?
it's 1 to 3, 3 to 5 ounce servings a week, but
Okay.
being really careful now because of the pollution in our world. Even in like the grown factories, those can be really concerning. So look where you're getting your fish from. Overseas doesn't have the same requirements that we have in terms of our fish, but some of those fish can have high levels of mercury and other things. And so women who are pregnant or who may become pregnant have a restriction on that. And then people who have certain like kidney diseases. So there's lots of exceptions. There's always exceptions, but that's the general rule.
Perfect. One was clarifying. You didn't say drink olive oil, right?
No, but people do say to do that. And I have done that. I actually, with Nutrafol, it says to take olive oil with like, or something with a high fat with your Nutrafol to regrow your hair. I mean, I would not recommend it, but people do actually do that. But I will take a spoonful of olive oil to take some of my supplements that need fat. They're fat soluble supplements, so it needs to have fat